Hey guys, Todd here. Today we're going to install the 2-inch leveling kit from Supreme Suspensions on this 2021 Ford F-150. Now this is a simple spacer kit that sits right on top of the factory strut. So it's going to work whether you have a 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive truck. Now if you just want that extra 2 inches to get rid of the factory rake, or if you're going to do like us and put on some bigger wheels and tires, this will get you there. The tools I'll be using for this installation are an 8, 18, and 21 millimeter wrenches, 10, 18, and 21 millimeter sockets, a T47 Torx bit, pneumatic impact driver, a pry bar, a fastener removal tool, a hammer, and a torque wrench. I'll also be using a vehicle lift and a floor jack, but the job can be done with just a floor jack and jack stands. Now make sure you're subscribed to our channel to stay up to date with all our latest content. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, now I've already got the truck off the ground and the front tire removed. First thing we're going to do is focus on our brake line and ABS line. We want to make sure all this stuff is loose so that we have some room and not stress this. So we're going to pop this loose. I've got a fastener removal tool I'm going to pop this loose with. And now I'm going to use a 10 millimeter and take the ABS line bracket loose from the knuckle. All right, all that is out of the way and I've got plenty of slack. Next I'm going to use a 21 millimeter to take loose the end length from the knuckle. All right, now we're going to use an 18 millimeter and just loosen this up for right now. We're not going to take it all the way off. Now, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on this tension, so it's not going to take much to bump this, and that will jar that loose, and that will be unseated from the knuckle. There it goes. All right, now that's unseated. This again is flat up against the knuckle, and we're not going to pull this off just yet. When we do, we're going to actually support the bottom of the lower control arm with a floor jack so that it doesn't just spring out of the way. All right, next we're going to use a 21 millimeter and remove the nut from the tie rod. All right, we're going to go ahead and hit this from the side and get that free. All right, next we're going to use an 18 millimeter to remove the nuts on the lower strut mount. All right, next we're going to use an 18 millimeter to remove all 3 nuts from the upper strut mount. Okay, now the lower control arm I have got supported with a floor jack right now. And so what that does is that pushes up on that lower control arm and takes some of the pressure off of this connection here. Now I'm going to use an 18 millimeter, go ahead and finish taking this nut off. That way I can separate the upper control arm from the steering knuckle. It probably will still pop a little bit. Look at that. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and set this to the side. I'm going to go ahead and pull the pressure off the lower control arm to lower this back down. And I'm going to tie this out of the way. All right, now we're going to use a pry bar and work the factory strut out. Okay, now here is our leveling kit spacer block. What you're going to notice is you got some small holes here and some larger holes here. When I flip this over, on this side we've got some recessed pockets for the small holes. What we're going to do is we're going to take our Allen bolts that are provided in our kit and we're going to get those started in those holes. Once we get those started, we're going to take an 8mm Allen wrench and seat those in place. All right, now here is our factory strut. What we're going to do is take our spacer, line it up. It only goes on one way, so we're going to line it up to the factory bolts or the studs, and then we're going to put the provided hardware onto each of these studs. We got a washer, lock washer, and a nut. Use a 17mm and get that kind of seated in place. We're going to torque the hardware to 35 foot-pounds. All right, now what you're going to notice is that the bolts that are here from the factory are an exact mirror image from the bolts that we're putting in. So whenever this goes back in, it has to rotate 180 degrees to fit in properly. Now, one thing I want to point out is that down here at the bar pin, where this came out, you might notice that bar pin is not exactly in line with the strut. It's at a slight angle. So that bar pin is going to have to be rotated in the other direction to get the angle go in the opposite direction so it fits back in properly. So in order to do that, I've already gone ahead and hit a little bit of penetrating lubricant along here to let it move easier, and let me show you how I do it. All right, now here is the bottom of the strut. I just want to show you these bolts that are coming out, these studs, they're known as the bar pin. So they're kind of at a little bit of an angle this way, and we want to bring them at an angle this way because this has to rotate 180 degrees. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to set it back into the lower control arm, and then I'm just going to pull back. And that changes the angle. I can pull them back out, and I'm going to go a little bit further. And there we go. Now we can go ahead and put it back in. I'm going to start by setting the top side up into the frame cup at the top. Set it right back up through the factory holes. And I'm going to use the factory hardware and just get it started. We want these front bolts to be loosened up enough to allow the bottom to rotate in and line up the bar pins with the holes in the lower control arm. Now we're going to push down on the lower control arm and line up the bar pins to the holes and let it sink in. And now we can attach our factory hardware at the bottom of the bar pins. All right, again, we're just using the factory hardware. We're going to snug this down with our 18mm wrench, and then we're going to tighten it down to 85 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and tighten up the factory hardware at the top to 35 foot-pounds. All right, now I'm going to have a friend of mine lift up the bottom of the upper control arm with a floor jack. Just make sure that while you're doing this, we're not putting too much pressure on our jack stands. If we're lifting it off our jack stands, that's no good. Don't do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to close this gap to where we can line up our upper control arm to our steering knuckle as well as our tie rod end. So I'm going to go ahead and take the factory hardware off of these. And let's go ahead and raise her up. All right, next I'm going to take a 21mm wrench and put it on the end link nut and use a T47 Torx bit and hold that end link still and tighten down the end link. All right, next what we're going to do is reconnect our tie rod end to the steering knuckle. Okay, now the tie rod is holding everything in place, we can go ahead and tighten this down with an 18mm. If this starts to spin on us, we can use an 8mm, hold this still while we tighten this up. Then we're going to torque this down to 85 foot-pounds. All right, now we can go ahead and tighten our tie rod to 111. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reconnect our ABS line to our brake line and our brake line bracket to the spindle. Well, I went ahead and repeated all the same steps on the driver's side, then I installed the new wheels and tires. Next stop is the alignment shop, and that concludes the installation. If you found this video helpful, make sure and give us a thumbs up. If you want to know more about the product, check the links in the description below. As always, if you have any questions, call the experts or visit us online.